Hey everybody, Jab Radakovich here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca. Today we're talking about values-based decision making, and my friend Tristan has a question for me. Tristan?
Thanks, Javin. Yeah, could you explain maybe a little bit about the value of values-based decision making in terms of land projects,
Hmm.
and maybe bring in a few practical examples as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything we do, life, projects, relationships, all of it, we can think of as a whole, WHOLE. It's a whole we are managing. It is a whole within a whole within a whole. And this kind of comes in with the concept and the theory of holons, HOLON. And holons are the idea of nested systems within systems. So if you have a group of people together or the people of the planet, that's a holon. As you come into different types of social, economic, ethnic, biological distinctions, we have other holons of humans. And then as you come down and down, you get to communities and families and individuals. And then within us, we have systems. We have GI systems, gastrointestinal, we have circulatory systems. And then within that, there's systems within that. So we have these nested systems. So we never really thought about that when it came to management. We never thought that we have these holes, WHOLE, these holes that we are managing. So when we come to a land project, be it a homestead, a farm, a land-based business, production-based business, a business itself, it's something we're managing. It's a whole. Now, similarly, if we go into business to make money, chances are we're missing out the fact that you have to do that business every single day. And at some point, the making money will be more frustrating than the quality of life that it produces. I think everybody can raise their hand if I asked, have you ever had a job that you didn't like? That's exactly what I'm talking about. And when you get to that place of not having a job that you don't like, now all of a sudden you're willing to, flip the table over and being like, I don't care, I'll do anything. Really, when it really starts to rub against the essence of your being. When we get to land, it's almost as important because so much of our focus when we come to land is based upon other people's thoughts and processes and designs. This is what you should do. This is why you should be doing it. And so values-based decision making gives you the opportunity to say, what is the context around my land? What do I want it to be like, feel like? What do I want it to be in the future? And then as we come up to creating that, the distillation process plus the evaluation process of taking any decision, should I have chickens? Should I have a pond? Is it the right time to get a map? Should we do a complete renovation of the insulation of the house? All of these minute decisions that are physical, tangible, they cost money, they take time. You have to choose one over the other. You're not going to be managing a broiler set of 160 birds at the same time as you're re-insulating the house, at the same time as you're putting in the water line. You may think you're doing them at the same time, but you can only physically do one of them at a time. And so what values-based decision making does is says, one, what do we want the future of this place to feel like, to be like? What's the legacy of this place? Not how many chickens are in it, not how many trees are in it, but is this a regenerative ruin? Is this something that if we leave behind will consistently produce more life with it? And this is something I've started to introduce to friends and family and even partners. Just the other day, we were talking about if we have to leave this place for any period of time, how is it a regenerative ruin? And there's some things we set up that are regenerative ruins that will constantly catch and store water, that'll constantly grow more food, constantly grow more habitat. And there's some things that are completely dependent upon our efforts. And that's one of those basic ways that this has fundamentally changed the way that I manage my landscape. The other one that I really enjoy is a context piece from a client years ago, which was, and they're a farmer. Every day is a vacation. For those of you that have ever grown food, for those of you that have ever farmed, the idea of that, I think for most of us is crazy. But when you actively bring that up as, no, I want this to be true, all of a sudden the animals you don't like to manage and the way that you're managing them, that's up for grabs. Because when you have this values-based decision making, you have a ruthless clarity of vision. And a ruthless clarity of vision is kind of like being pregnant. You can't be kind of pregnant. You're either in it or you're not. And that's what's so amazing is if you go, no, I want to enjoy every single moment of my day and I want it to be so exciting and exceptional that the way I muck out the stalls, if I muck out the stalls, if I have the horses that create the need for mucking out the stalls, all of that becomes up for negotiation, and life is 100% negotiable. So within land design, you have that ability. And I think the other thing that I really like about values-based decision making is it focuses on the weak link. It focuses on what's the weak link here. So if you're, I remember working with a client who had an issue with their cattle, and they had an issue with a parasite that was in their cattle. And so within values-based decision making, which was originally based on holistic management's decision-making process created by Alan Savory, you get to the weak link section, you get to the ecological weak link section, and you're going, okay, well, what's the weak link of the organism that's currently creating the issue? And this parasite had a small step where it would exit the cow, would create its eggs in the grass, and then would come alive again. And basically looking at that, it's like, oh, I just need not have my cows on the same pasture in the time frame that the parasite comes out and then moves into its reproductive cycle. If I can keep them off that grass for 3 weeks, I've broken the entire cycle of the parasite. Yeah, there'll be a couple of truly tenacious organisms that are outliers, but if I run this protocol for 4 or 5 seasons, I'll be done. So that idea of looking at the weak link, always managing for that weak link, and looking towards the future consistently produces exceptional results. I'm curious, Tristan, in your experience, how have you seen values-based decision making increase your aims, your goals, your objectives for a piece of land, or how have you seen it work for others?
Yeah, well, let me speak a bit for myself, because I think I'm sort of now in my second land-based project. The first one was in the city, and it was a kind of urban permaculture homestead on a 1/4 acre, and it was when I was fresh out of my PDC and raring to go, and came out of that PDC with a design, and it was like, great, let's implement, and it was always the next thing, like, cool, what's the next thing I'm going to put in? And always reaching for that sort of goal that I had of filling the property with things, and never really stopping to ask, well, why was I doing each one? And why was I implementing at the pace that I did? And at the time, I was still working full time as a traveling sports journalist, and ultimately leaving a lot of the responsibility for running these things that I implemented to my dear wife, who was, a new mother as well. So thankfully, the experience she had means that she regularly reminds me of that experience now as I move into a second project, which is more kind of country-based. It is on just over a hectare, although a lot of it is indigenous forest that, is just being left. But there's also the added complexity of now we co-own this property with another family. And so it comes back to your Holon's introduction, where you have that complexity of not only having an individual or a family who are trying to figure out what to do with this particular piece of land, you have 2 families, who come with, largely aligned ideas and values, but ultimately you're never going to be exactly, we're all different, and there's diversity. And it brings the question of, how do you work with a piece of land in a way that doesn't hold individuals back when they're raring to go and, have the energy and the drive, but that takes everybody's kind of needs and values into account. And so in the first instance, in the city, no values-based decision making. Ultimately, we created something beautiful, but cost ourselves a lot of quality of life in terms of the way that we did it, the how. Now going into this with values-based decision making, and actively using the tool now with the 2 families, we're finding that there's the opportunity to slow things down a little bit, check in what's important, and then really like thread the needle of a decision. So okay, one family is very keen to implement, zone one food garden. How does this work within the sort of co-ownership agreement and the financial input that comes from each family, and who puts in what time, who gets what yield? There's a lot of complexity there, and I'm finding that now that I'm more in touch with what my values are and how I want to be able to contribute or not to a project like that, it means that whatever is created is no longer owning anybody. And so we are actively stepping into both an individual and collective reality that is more in touch with a quality of life rather than an achievement or a particular outcome. And yeah, that's been really valuable for us so far.
Yeah, yeah. The number of permaculture related projects that I've seen that people have created without any sense of the maintenance in terms of who's going to maintain this. And if it's not me, oh, they could take care of it. Well, can they? Just that understanding of who's going to take care of this. And I think this comes to a nice piece to round out our conversation. This idea of subtle indicators, subtle negative and subtle positive indicators that the decisions we make are good ones, is an element of values-based decision making that constantly refines the decision making process and hones the process itself. You know, we always talk about how values-based decision making is one of the only self-honing tools out there on the market. I use a knife, it gets dull. I use values-based decision making, it sharper. It gets more robust. It gets more useful. And when we use things like subtle indicators, like, am I losing sleep? Does my wife like me more or less? Am I being invited into my home more so? So these types of things. These are great indicators for all of us to keep in mind that our decisions have consequences, effects, and those effects can be monitored and measured, and we can use those measurements as guides. Do I have more or less time? We all have weak links inside of our essence, and one of my weak links is I'll say yes to anything. And I think a lot of folks in a self-directed way, when you make your own work and there's amazing prospects and projects, you're like, oh, I want this, I want that. I've gotten very good at saying no, but generally if it's amazing and interesting, I'm really excited by it. And this is what I've loved about values-based decision making, is that it gives me a sense of, oh, this is a yes, 100%. And then that one question that's like, do you have time for it? Like, oh, now I have to go and check the calendar. And you get into it, and that's the sober second thought. That's that inoculating bias. Oh, I have to do everything that comes to me. Oh, I have to save the world, as so many people within permaculture, regenerative land care have. This is one of those great elements that allows you to step back and go, yeah, I'd like to do it, but what's my timing looking like? And can I renegotiate, and can I move myself out of this, or can I just say no from the get-go? And I think that's where, from a land-based perspective, this is so useful, because some of the systems and processes we enact, sometimes we need to take them out. I've got an amazing colleague and friend who's been a food forester for years. And he taught me how to be ruthless for taste. If it's not high on the yum scale, you pull it out of the food forest. And similarly, if it's not high on the quality of life, you pull it out of the land project, you pull it out of the life project. Sure, we have obligations. Sure, there are things we have to do that we may not like to do, but then we get into the how we're doing them. And sometimes we get to a fundamental understanding of, well, maybe even doing them doesn't work, or how I'm doing them, or the approach, the mentality I come with them. So Tristan, thank you so much for that question. That was a great one. Really brought a lot of enlivened process out of it. And I just love hearing that other people make projects that their wives, partners, they're questioning lots of things because of it. So folks, if you've been listening to values-based decision making, the conversation about this, and going, oh, that's kind of interesting, I want to learn more, there's a couple of ways to interact with this work. One is you can work one-on-one with myself. Next, we have a group course coming up. You can check it out in the links below. or you can do the DIY version. You can walk along the process yourself, totally up to you. Remember, if you don't design your life, it'll be designed for you for somebody else's benefit, not for yours. And if that's the case, it's always a good time to redesign. And values-based decision making could be a tool that's a good fit for you. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.